Well, we'll talk a bit about government relations today, although not a lot on this quick PowerPoint will relate to the guests that we're going to have. Fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to look at it, a lot of the government interactions are actually with higher levels of government, be it compliance with federal or state laws versus actual things that are at the local level, but very difficult for us to get state or federal officials to come to class. So we kind of do what we have, and who we'll have come in as one of the county commissioners and probably one of the county sanitarian people. And what they do is sanitarian people go and determine the worthiness of structures, I believe, for occupancy or use for businesses, and also safety standards and whatnot for like restaurants, etc. So we get some input there about things that go on. Sometimes I've thought about inviting both city and county at the same time, but they get some feuds going, and that may not work out that well. So anyhow, we'll kind of whip through this, but again, there's probably not a ton on here that will be particularly applicable to what we're going to be doing, but might help you with your quiz. Legal terminology, a lot of this stuff came from business law, which you all should have had. We've got all kinds of statutory, but common law is law sort of made by judicial decisions. Decisions like Roe v. Wade that legalized abortions, didn't have anything to do with statutory law. It was just basically the judges saying that was something that should be allowed, so it basically became a law. Interstate Commerce Clause has to do with the federal government being able to, of course, regulate commerce throughout the United States. Police power. The states have the right to pass laws for the general welfare of the people, and due process. Ooh, geez, we hear a lot about that with the current impeachment testimony and whatnot going on. Government branches, 3 branches of government, balance of power. We talk about that, of course. Types of law, public, criminal, private, civil. Talk about that. Uniform Commercial Code is something. Our county won't be able to talk about that, but it was something that we had UCC forms at the bank that we used for taking collateral in a lot of business assets that weren't real property and were not titled. Okay, and crops and cattle, those types of things. So did quite a bit of stuff with that, although that was just kind of one specific part of that UCC. Tort, of course, are actions that people take that might cause harm to others, be it through negligence or otherwise. And we could ask, it'd be interesting, and I don't know that I've asked that in the past, if the county commissioners have any relationship really with the courts, and they certainly might in terms of the prosecutor, the prosecuting attorney or the county attorney, and we can certainly ask questions about that. And they've had some difficulties at our county, not very recently, but a few years ago. Had some real issues there, and I think those would be fair questions. They do get into into the business side of things, because that's the person that has to enforce types of laws and whatnot. So it's also an expense, right, of the county that we have to pay to have that court system, and I think there's some interesting questions there. One that might come up, I think it's come up in the past, is we've got a border up north, and train that comes through. That's kind of a major place where border protection people end up arresting quite a few people. I think a lot of those get tried in our county court, maybe our district court. I don't know if we fund the district court or if we just fund the county court, and I don't know that we get any compensation for that. I'm not so sure that the county doesn't have to bear those costs, which is kind of an unusual, I guess it's not unusual, but kind of a bad thing that we have to bear the burden of that. But those are questions that we can certainly ask, in regards to government. Of course, the taxation and payment of those things is important to every business, right? Tort law. We won't get into tort law. We certainly won't get into bankruptcy, very interesting conversations, but bankruptcy court is actually separate from the regular court system. It is its own court system. Um, it can, rulings from the bankruptcy court can at times move on to the regular court system, but it's pretty rare. It's pretty darn rare. Usually bankruptcy court rulings kind of stand on their own and don't get, don't get appealed very often. So different types of bankruptcy. I'm sure you should know about those. Government help, we do have the SBA, Small Business Administration, SCORE, which is Service Corps of Retired Executives, FSA, Farm Service Agency. We have a state of Montana Department of Commerce. And be interesting to ask questions about the relationships that the county commissioners, though, might have with the Department of Commerce, in terms of business. Building businesses or creating a friendly environment for business and whatnot. Though there might be some interactions there that I'm not sure of. SBDC, in Havre's case, that's Bear Paw Development Corporation, which is a small business or an SBDC. And I think the county has some interactions with them, and so we could certainly ask about that. I don't know that the county commissioners get into any oversight or anything like that, but I do think they have some interactions there. So the Department of Commerce, this is the U.S. Department of Commerce, different things that are under there. I don't think we're going to be able to get into that too much. Same with Department of Agriculture and some of the things that they offer. And some of those might, there might be some activity there that our county would participate in. I don't know that it would be much. Coping with government regulations. Do they give help? Do the commissioners give much help, right? When it comes to those types of things, especially local regulations. What kind of services might they offer to comply with? In this case, it would be county, but Havre's included in the county, and so like the sanitarian and whatnot, it's a county employee, but would regulate businesses within the city of Havre as well. Does that create a good environment? What do we think about our environment in Havre for small businesses? Is it advantageous or not? Some questions that we can ask about the local, right? What to look for in a lawyer. Try to avoid needing a lawyer, I guess, except for maybe setting up some business documents. And I suppose I should say that if you do if you invest a little bit on the front side there, sometimes you save a lot on the back side. So that's one of those things that is worth doing, like if you're setting up a business or something. So social responsibility, there's been a lot in the news here. Now, not something that we'll talk about probably with our county commissioner, although we certainly can, ask his feelings about that. Some of the big businesses here in the U.S., some of their CEOs got together and said that, no longer should they just consider shareholder interests, but they ought to consider stakeholder interests, which is a whole bunch of people besides just the shareholders. That's in stark contrast to something Milton Friedman wrote 30 or 40 years ago that he said that, the corporation's only obligation should be to its shareholders. And there's a whole lot of arguments in between. I don't know that, again, our county commissioner is going to have a lot to say about that, or our county sanitarian, but interesting discussion. So, business forms of social responsibility, consumerism, creating products that are safe and useful, employee relations, environmental protection. There you go. Community relations, business ethics. Not something we're probably going to talk about. I do like this quote from Warren Buffett. One that everybody ought to remember. Ethics in the workplace, probably things, again, that we won't talk about. It really doesn't have a lot to do with the government overall, right? I don't know. I guess they just decided to kind of throw it in on this chapter. 4-way test of self. This is for ethical considerations. Is something the truth? That guy's honest. Is it fair to all? Guess maybe. Can it build goodwill? There you go. Is it beneficial to all? Well, at least that's a warning that would be beneficial to all. So there you have it. So other questions that we should, talk about probably when we get the county commissioner in the county, what are things that the county sanitarian looks at? Is it just restaurants? Is it just the safety and soundness? Are they proactive or reactive? Right? Do you get in ahead of time before business gets going and help them set up, and to what extent? Or do you just get in when you get calls about things that are of concern? And do you get calls? Do you get patrons coming in and patrons after they've eaten at a place say, calling up and saying, yeah, you need to go check that place out. I think there is a site actually at the county that kind of lists complaints that have been lodged against restaurants, local restaurants. So, something that, and not complaints like, oh, the service was crappy, those types of things, but complaints that are legitimately concerned about, sanitation and those types of things. So, yeah, and it may not be complaints, it may be just reports of inspections. I can't remember, but good questions to ask, right? And if that affects their business, probably. Um, I think, where would you eat or where wouldn't you eat? those are kind of interesting questions. Are there places in town you just won't eat because of your job? So, good questions that we could ask. Think in terms of that, and the county commissioners. Do you guys have make rules that make it easier or maybe more difficult, for people to start businesses or maintain businesses in the Hill County area? In this case, the commissioners, of course, serve the entire Hill County. Are the rules different throughout the county? I think there's two, if I'm not mistaken, there are two incorporated towns in the county, and that'd be Havre and Hingham, and I think they can make extra rules or different rules. And what's the relationship like between Hill County and Havre, and does that have an effect on business? Are there businesses that start up outside of the city limits maybe to gain some advantage, right? I think maybe even when the Walmart was built, it might have been outside of city limits. I'm not sure. There's good questions. You got the whole Walmart and now North 40, and out in that area. It wasn't that long ago that I'm sure that was outside the city limits, and it might still be. Cities got rules to annex, do those types of things, bring it into the city limits because they get some protection from fire and police, regardless of whether they were in the city limits or not. So, yeah, there's some questions about those things that certainly we could ask. And how does that affect the county? Does the county then lose out on some of the funding, and et cetera, et cetera? So, good questions to ask. I hope I've given you enough there to give you some idea of some direction of where we can take that questioning. So, thanks. I look forward to getting your questions for those guests.